Your title really should only be 3 to 4 words. And if you're wasting one of them with the word podcast, then you should definitely think about changing it. The other rule I was breaking is I tell people to make it very, very obvious what the show is about. If someone looks at a name and they don't know what it's about, they're just going to keep on scrolling. Think about where you want your podcast to be in 1 year, 2 years, and then have a name that reflects on those future goals. At the end of the day, it is the holy grail of podcasts. It's all everyone talks about. It's actually what I don't advise doing. Welcome to another episode of Smarter Podcasting with me, your host, Neil Mackay, the podcast guy. I'm the founder of 7 Million Bikes Podcast, and I'm sitting here in the Saigon Podcast studio, which gives you a bit of a clue if you didn't know. I'm sitting here in Saigon in Vietnam. I started 7 Million Bikes Podcast after I lost my job during COVID, and we've now worked with over 100 podcasts, helped with thousands of episodes, millions of downloads, and helped many shows get to the top of the podcast charts. I created this show, Smarter Podcasting, to help you make the best podcast possible. And in this episode today, I'm going to be sharing with you a very, very personal story that I have just gone through, and it's going to answer a big, big question. Should you ever change your podcast name? Now, I have just done this for the 4th time with my first and biggest show, a Vietnam podcast, which is now called Discover Vietnam, a Vietnam podcast. So a very small but a very big change. And let me tell you why I did that. So this show is now in the top 5% of podcasts worldwide. We've had over 100,000 downloads. We're finally getting sponsors and it's growing and growing. We've just had some of our biggest months of downloads. So with everything going so well, why have I suddenly changed the name? Well, I want to get bigger and better. I started this podcast just for a hobby because I was bored one day back in 2019. I wanted to get to know the real people in Saigon. I knew people on a surface level, but I wanted to get to know their stories. So I just read an article that day that I decided to make a podcast about the number of motorbikes in Saigon. And if you've been in Vietnam or you've seen any sort of videos, you'll know that the traffic is absolutely crazy, especially in downtown Saigon. And I just read that there were 7.4 million motorbikes in Saigon alone. And at that point, the population was only 9 million. It's expanded now to a super city, it's 14 million. But anyway, 7.4 million motorbikes for just 9 million people. And I thought that was a fun and quirky name. So the podcast was originally called 7 Million Bikes, A Saigon Podcast. I thought that was awesome. But then I started getting messages from people asking me, could they rent a motorbike from me? So that was a bit of a wake-up call that the name wasn't working. And as I developed, my business became a bit bigger. So I was a stand-up comedian. I don't do it anymore. I used to run comedy shows. I do quiz nights, which I still do one a week. And I started to do some small-scale music shows as well. And so over time, 7 Million Bikes became the brand. We did podcasts, comedy shows, and quiz nights, music nights, events. And so the name changed from 7 Million Bikes, a Saigon Podcast, to just a Saigon Podcast. But over COVID, as we couldn't do in-person interviews, I ended up interviewing people from all over the world and sharing some really, really incredible stories of people connected to Vietnam. And so at some stage, I can't even remember when, the name changed to just a Vietnam podcast, and 7 Million Bikes remained the overall brand. Now, through time as well, after COVID a bit, I decided that I was doing so much, but none of it I was doing really well. And at one point, I had 8 different jobs on the go, some of it under 7 Million Bikes. And at one point in the beginning of 2022, I decided, you know what, I need to start saying no to stuff and I need to focus on one thing, and it's going to be podcast. And so that's where another name change came in, and the brand became 7 Million Bikes Podcasts. We don't do anything else now. We don't do events. We don't do comedy shows. We do podcasts, and we do them well. And we are really excited to work with people around the world and help them make the best podcast possible. So the main brand is 7 Million Bikes Podcasts. I continued my show even after a long break, which I can tell you about on another episode, but I did a long break of a Vietnam podcast and then I restarted it. I was like, I'm going to do it bigger and better than ever. And it's been going really, really well. We've been consistently publishing episodes and even going up to 2 episodes a week as well. We're taking a bit of a break on that, but we were doing 2 episodes a week for a while. And then now we're in the amazing Saigon Podcast Studio, which is available for rent in Saigon if you're here. And so things are just going better and better and better. So to go back to my question at the beginning, why change the name now? Well, for one, the name of the podcast, A Vietnam Podcast, goes against basically the advice that I give to you. One of the biggest pieces of advice I give to somebody coming up with a podcast name, don't use the word podcast. People already know what it is. They're already searching in Spotify or Apple Podcasts. You don't need to tell them that they're listening to a podcast. So I was already breaking one of my own rules there. The other rule I was breaking is I tell people to make it very, very obvious what the show is about. And after a recent conversation with somebody who runs a media company here, he was like, I don't really know what a Vietnam podcast is about. I know it's about Vietnam, but that's all. He does a show called Vietnam Innovators, and it's very specific about how to run a business, how to overcome business challenges in Vietnam. So that really, really got me thinking. So then I went and looked at our top performing episodes, and this is what really stuck out. Our top performing episodes weren't actually under a Vietnam podcast brand. They were pod swaps where I've hosted them on other shows. It was mostly Vietnam is Awesome, a now defunct podcast, but one that we helped create and helped get to the top of the charts. And on that podcast, I interviewed people about Vietnam, and the titles, which I would have come up with, I don't even remember thinking about it much at the time, but the titles were all Discover Something. So they were all tourism related. So it was like Discover Phong Nha, Discover the Wonders of Ha Long Bay. And one of them was like, Discover Why Hanoi is going to become the Paris of the 1930s, something like that. And they all had thousands of downloads, like not just like a little bit more downloads, they had way more downloads. And I was like, okay, I think there's something here. And I literally use ChatGPT for everything. It's my assistant on everything I do. It helps me with all my decisions. So I fed into ChatGPT all the information from our downloads, from our shows, from our audiences. And I was already thinking of changing the name. I was like, should I call it Vietnam Living, Life in Vietnam, and center it more around giving solutions to answers of people who are thinking of moving here or who already live here, because my audience is split from people who live in Vietnam and live overseas. And so through a whole lot of back and forth, a lot of chat with ChatGPT, but also talking to my team, talking to my wife, obviously, talking to Charlotte Lewis West, who's a podcast strategist, and going through some ideas with her, I settled on the name Discover Vietnam, but a Vietnam podcast. So I'm still retaining the old name in there, but now it's much more clear what this podcast is about. And all the episode titles are going to then fit into that naming scheme. So they're all going to be called Discover Something. And it could be a total bust. Maybe I'm going to be totally wrong, but I've changed the name. I've written down all the stats as of the day of the name change, and then I'm going to evaluate them to see if it does indeed increase the amount of downloads. Part of the reason I did that as well is to make the show even clearer on what we do, but also, I'll be honest, to be more attractive to sponsors as well. Because now, instead of just being a show that randomly shares the stories of people connected to Vietnam, which I personally loved and has gotten the show to the success that it's enjoyed. But if I want to go to a sponsor, how do I really sell it? What does the show do? How does it relate to their brand? So the name is now Discover Vietnam, a Vietnam podcast. In this episode of Smarter Podcasting, I'm sharing with you why I've changed the name, but also, if you're thinking about it, should you change the name of your podcast? So let's talk about why you might want to change your name. One of the things is brands evolve, just as mine has, brands change. Unless you are already in the top 0.1% of podcasts like the Joe Rogan Experience, who are probably never going to change the name and never should, but unless you're in those upper echelons, changing the name of your podcast shouldn't affect your listeners. If anything, it should make them increase. So think about your searchability on YouTube and on SEO. Think about your searchability on podcast platforms. Are people typing in your name? These big shows have big budgets. They spend loads on marketing. You might not have that kind of budget and you're relying on organic traffic. So if your show title is really long, it's complicated, it's a bit quirky or fun, like mine was 7 Million Bikes, people might have looked at it and thought, this is about motorbikes. If your podcast name doesn't clearly say what your podcast does, then you may want to think about changing it. And especially if you are like me and you use that dreaded word podcast in one of those words, because your title really should only be 3 to 4 words. And if you're wasting one of them with the word podcast, then you should definitely think about changing it. You also may just want to align with your audience's expectations as well. As I said, I looked at my episodes and my audience clearly responded to episodes with the title Discover Something About Vietnam. And so we're going to focus on giving them that value in every episode so we can help them discover more about this country. So think about your podcast, look at some of your top performing episode titles. Again, use ChatGPT for everything, stuff that would be beyond what I could personally do. or would have taken hours and days to do now, go to your host platform, download those stats, take screenshots of them, whatever you need to do, plug it into ChatGPT or whatever AI you use, and just say, can you evaluate this for me? What trends do you notice? What do you see? It might tell you about like episode length. Maybe certain episodes do better with a shorter or longer length. It's going to notice the cadence, the timing, all that stuff that we talk about, or how to make a great podcast. ChatGPT can analyze your existing episodes already and then give you that information. And one of the things might be change the name so that you can align with your audience, because it seems like they really, really respond to this. So think about what your audience wants if you're going to change your name. And then, as I mentioned, think about sponsorship. At the end of the day, it is the holy grail of podcasts. It's all everyone talks about. It's actually what I don't advise doing. You should be selling your own services. But for me, with a Vietnam podcast, now Discover Vietnam, I don't have a service to sell in terms of Vietnam. I just love living here. I wanted to do the show for a hobby. I still do the show for a hobby. And if we can get a little bit of sponsorship from it, then it's a nice little bonus. It's not part of my business plans. My business plans is here, the Saigon Podcast Studio, 7 Million Bikes Podcast, helping people around the world making podcasts. And that's what we do with this show, Smarter Podcasting, and hopefully helping you. And just don't forget, if you do want to work with us, get in touch. That is the point of this show. But if you are looking for sponsors, then think about how you are solving that problem for them. What are your sponsors looking for that you can help them with? So that was part of the rebrand, was thinking about if we are going to go out to sponsors in the market and say, hey, you want to sponsor Discover Vietnam? It makes way more sense because our listeners are now going to be the audience that they want. Maybe it's like an insurance brand that want to give expat insurance, or they want to give travel insurance. Maybe it's a travel company that want to be attractive to not only expats and locals that live here, but people overseas who are visiting. So think about your podcast in terms of what do sponsors want, and maybe you can change your name to help reflect that better. Now, I'm talking up all the reasons why you should or could change your podcast name, but there are also some very, very valid reasons why you shouldn't change your podcast name. So have a really good think about it before you do anything. But before you change it, just have a really good think about your brand recognition. Now, I don't know the size of your podcast. I don't know your listeners. Maybe they love the name. Maybe it's well known in your industry, and if you change it, it's going to cause a lot of confusion. So talk to people, talk to your listeners, ask for advice before you ever change it. If it's going to make you lose that brand recognition, then absolutely don't change it at all. You can think of adding on a little tagline or a colon, something like that. That's what I did. Mine for up until now was a Vietnam podcast, colon, culture, community, and conversations, just to give that really specific tagline of what the podcast was about. So you can think about adding a tagline instead of just changing the whole name, but you may lose a lot if you do. So have a good think about that. And then the biggest thing as well, you might confuse your loyal listeners. So make sure you bring them along for the journey. Do an episode announcing the change before or as you do it. Make sure you have social media posts. Make sure that they know exactly what they're going to be getting in the future and how things are changing or not changing. And even if it's just a small change like the name, make sure you bring your listeners along for the journey. You might also not want to change the podcast name for the sake of continuity. I'm one of these people, it's like, do what I do, not what I say. And I just told you at the beginning, like I changed my podcast name 4 times, I think. It has been over 6 years. They have always been very subtle changes, and I do bring the listener with me along the way. But if you're changing your podcast name too often, it can lead to the podcast looking a bit unstable, and it means you don't really know what you're doing, and you're going to continually confuse your audience. So just be careful if you do change it. It could make you look bad. It could make you look like you don't know what you're doing if you're continually chopping and changing that name. And if you are going to change it, just be very clear to your audience why you're changing it. And then how to decide if it's time to change your podcast name. 3 big things. Number 1, check your listener data. Just like I said, feed it into ChatGPT, look at the titles, the lengths, find out what's working, find out what your listeners want. Is your listenership going up or is it going down? If it's going down, then yeah, definitely I would want to think about changing the name. And then look at the name that you have right now. Does it do what it says on the tin? Is it obvious what your podcast is about? I would suggest that fun, quirky names, like I did 7 Million Bikes, can be exactly that. They can be fun and quirky, but it's pretty much an inside joke that only you know about. You want to be inclusive so that when someone's scrolling through the app on Spotify or Apple Podcast and they see that name, they know exactly what it is. They don't have to figure it out. If someone looks at a name and they don't know what it's about, they're just going to keep on scrolling. And then last one, consider your future goals. Do you want sponsorship? Do you want to keep growing? Do you want to go down a different track? Do you want to produce different content? think about where you want your podcast to be in 1 year, 2 years, and then have a name that reflects on those future goals. So if you have decided to change your name, how do you do it? Well, the biggest thing I would say is keep continuity. So if you go and look at my show, A Vietnam Podcast, which is now called Discover Vietnam, A Vietnam Podcast, the colors, our brand colors, the imaging, the font, everything is the same. It's a pretty seamless change. All we did was change the artwork to Discover Vietnam, A Vietnam Podcast, which was easy to do. We'd updated the graphics a little bit. Then we just went on to the host website. We used Buzzsprout, changed the name there. We changed the About section to reflect the name. Then I went on to all of our social media channels like Facebook and Instagram, and then changed the names on there as well. So it's pretty simple to do. But as I mentioned, just make sure you bring the listener along for the journey so that they are involved and they know exactly what's happening. So some posts about it, do an episode about it, just a mini one as well to announce the change as well. And then in your new episodes, make sure to just remind people and mention that, now the podcast is called this, but it's the same old content and the same old host. And if you use dynamic ads and you don't have a sponsor, then that's a great way to add that into every episode in your back catalog. So do a quick dynamic ad, share the change, add it to your podcast for just a week or two. So it means every time somebody clicks on a new episode, they're going to hear about the change. The only danger with that, though, is if you have new listeners who didn't know the old name, then you might alienate them. You might confuse them if they're suddenly like, wait, I just clicked on Discover Vietnam and now this guy's telling me that it used to be called A Vietnam Podcast. I'm a bit confused. So just be wary if you do that. So changing your podcast name isn't something that you should do lightly. I was really reluctant at first. I love my show, A Vietnam Podcast. That name for me, and for a lot of people, it's really recognizable. They know it, and it's something that I just roll off the tongue. Our website's even called avietnampodcast.com, so that's partly why we've left the name in there. So it's Discover Vietnam, A Vietnam Podcast. So have a really good think about it. Look at that listener data. Do what your gut tells you. Talk to people. See if you think it's the right decision for your show for now and for the future. And if you have any questions, of course, then just get in touch with me. I'll be happy to talk you through more details about why I've changed the name and then how you can do it successfully as well. So don't forget, if you want to get in touch with me about changing the name or anything, go to 7millionbikes.com. There's a button in the top right that says Talk to Neil. Click on that, book a call with me, and I'll be happy to talk through with you about how you can work with 7 Million Bikes Podcast, how we can help you make the best podcast possible. That includes possibly changing the name, looking at the show notes, the titles, the content, the quality, everything that can help you be successful. So thanks again for tuning in to Smarter Podcasting, and I hope to bring you more valuable episodes every single week. Cheers.